It's unclear how, despite cultural divides, we can instantly connect with someone we just met. I lived in Colombia for 3 months during my 14-month journey through Latin America. At a neighborhood language exchange in Medellin, I met Adrian. Like most Colombians, he was polite, warm, and friendly. He spoke fluent English with a perfect American accent that was borderline annoying. He taught himself by watching American movies and TV shows, and through online ESL chat rooms. As a teenager, his father made it clear that learning English would put him ahead of the rest, and was about to spend a lot of money on an expensive tutoring program. But young Adrian looked into things and discovered the program was a scam. In efforts to save his family the money, he decided to go down the path of self-study, and now sounded like Jerry Seinfeld. Adrian grew up extremely poor in Cali, and now he was living the new American dream. He specialized in artificial intelligence, worked for a Silicon Valley tech company, earned an American software engineer salary, and enjoyed the low cost of living in the richest neighborhoods of Medellin and Bogota. We played a round of Jenga, and he told me about his first visit to the United States. He just accepted a job offer, and the company invited him to visit the headquarters in San Francisco. It had comfortable couches, a foosball table, and a complimentary snack bar. His manager welcomed him to the team and said there was one more test he had to pass. Adrian instantly became nervous. He already signed the offer letter. Didn't he have the job? The test turned out to be a ping pong match. He laughed with relief, even when he lost. Things were different in the United States, he thought. Once a colleague left work at 3 p.m., telling everyone he had a soccer tournament. His manager wished him good luck, and that was that. If Adrian did that in a Colombian company, he'd be fired on the spot. Seeing how much better workers were treated in the United States opened his eyes and raised his standards for the status quo. Years later, he was receiving offers for jobs he didn't even need to apply for. And in countries like Germany and Norway, places he never dreamed would be within his reach as a teenage boy in Cali. Not only were they inviting Adrian to work for their companies, they'd also move his entire family into their first world embrace. He rejected their generous offers because they required him to work in an office, and he preferred to work from home. Besides, he was happy in Colombia. His current work situation was intriguing. He worked for an American company, but hired another Colombian software engineer to do the work for him. Adrian paid him a higher salary than any software engineer could ever make in Colombia, but it was still a fraction of what one would make in the United States. A few years ago, the roles were switched. Adrian was a software engineer working through a middleman for an American company. He discovered how much the salary was when he was accidentally copied on an email, and was shocked at the measly income he was receiving in comparison to the full salary. He thought to himself, why be the software engineer working hard every day when I can be the middleman, earning over 10 times the money, doing next to nothing? Later that week, he invited me to his apartment in El Poblado. The building was still under construction, but residents were allowed to move in. The elevator functioned, but the interior wasn't finished. The outdoor pool still needed tiles, and the gym only had half the equipment. His unit had no gas or hot water. The refrigerator and washing machine weren't installed yet, but at least the internet worked. Despite needing a lot more construction, every unit in the building was purchased, all by Americans. Adrian owned apartments in Bogota and Medellin. All of them had increased in value in the past years thanks to the influx of foreigners. Most locals complained about foreigners driving up the cost of living in Medellin, but Adrian was profiting off of them. He was in the process of selling a second apartment in El Poblado, also unfinished, to an American buyer looking to diversify his investments outside the United States. Adrian actually wanted to live in the apartment in question and hadn't planned on selling. The location was in a quieter, more walkable part of El Poblado, which was known for its rowdy nightlife and hilly terrain. But he was receiving multiple offers for the property. The highest bid was from this American buyer, who also happened to be very condescending. Adrian raised the price to an unreasonable amount in efforts to drive the buyer away, but surprisingly he agreed to pay it, so he sold him the apartment and made a small fortune. Being rich had its downsides. His real estate agent once asked to borrow $1,000, which was a lot of money by Colombian standards. They weren't even friends, and only spoke when she had a prospective buyer. Adrian politely said no, and was exasperated when she didn't apologize later on for making such an inappropriate request. He didn't like speaking to most of his extended family because they usually call to ask for something, whether it's money or a favor. After seeing how well he did in his career, some of his younger cousins also decided to pursue software engineering in hopes of reaching similar levels of success and prosperity. One of his aunts asked if he could tutor his younger cousin, and even went as far as requesting he do her homework, to which he politely said no. The only family member he trusted was his mother, who was also the only person who knew his net worth. His father was a retired police officer. When Adrian was a child, he came home from school one day to find his mother lying in a pool of blood. His father and his friends beat her up and left her there. After his parents divorced, Adrian and his brother provided for their mother. His brother was a lawyer, and taking care of her was easy with their combined incomes. Their father sometimes asked for money, claiming it was money they owed him since he raised them, didn't he? It was only right they paid him back. Adrian gave him the money at first, but then stopped after deciding he didn't owe his father anything. He said his mother complained a lot. At first, she lived in Bogota, but grumbled about the chaos of the big city, so Adrian and his brother moved her to a small town where it was peaceful. After a couple of months, she moaned it was too quiet with nothing to do, and began talking about Cali, which was another big city. They moved her into an apartment in Cali, where she enjoyed the lively atmosphere but then complained about the heat and the mosquitoes. I asked if she'd enjoy living in Medellin, which seemed to be a good balance of all the things she liked. Adrian said it was too expensive to move her to Medellin, and it was likely she'd still find something to criticize and want to move again. He had a distant cousin who, years ago, was a successful drug dealer. He joked, he was Colombian. Of course he had at least one relative who was a drug dealer. This cousin had a ton of money and had access to countless beautiful women, but the decadence made him immune to enjoying most things, including sex. He paid other people to have sex while he watched, instead of participating. Adrian found out about this, and told himself no matter how wealthy he'd become, he'd never reach that point. He tried abstinence for 90 days, and was shocked at the intensity of his performance when he finally broke his chastity. He decided to stop masturbating and watching porn completely, so he'd never become desensitized to real sex. He told me Asian porn was his favorite. He loved the petite size and innocent cuteness of Asian women. It complemented his average height and dominant personality. Adrian was on the shorter side growing up. It made him incredibly shy and self-conscious around girls. His extended family would often comment on how small he was, concerned he wasn't growing. But he did grow, to a whopping 5'9", which was above average by Colombian standards. He thanked his lucky stars for the growth spurt, because he knew being a short man was a curse when it came to women. Adrian grew up in a Catholic family, but became an atheist after watching an animal documentary that showed the cruelty of nature. These were just creatures trying to eat and survive. Human beings were cruel because they enjoyed it. He decided there was no such thing as a higher power, and we were all left to our own devices. His favorite thing to do was going to a beautiful restaurant and having a delicious meal. There were many to choose from in Bogota, and more were opening in Medellin. He told me the further you go up the hills of El Poblado, the more upscale the restaurants. I teased him, saying that a man who can cook was very attractive. He responded that a man who was smart and resourceful enough to earn the money to eat in nice restaurants on a daily basis was also attractive. Even though Adrian grew up in Cali, which was known for its vibrant dance culture, he didn't know how to dance salsa or bachata. Growing up, he spent his free time playing video games, chess, learning English, and the piano, all self-taught. He was naturally inquisitive and competitive. At an early age, he had a thirst to prove himself, especially against people who mocked him. When he first started learning chess, he was shocked at how studying a few simple techniques put him at a distinct advantage against his peers, whose knowledge stopped at the basics. When he was 12, he wanted to try his luck with a group of older men playing chess for money. At first, they wouldn't let him play, saying he didn't have the money to buy in. He showed them his money, but they still wouldn't let him play, saying he didn't know the rules. Young Adrian stood there until one of the men agreed to play, not taking him seriously at all, telling his friends it'll be a quick game. He chuckled at Adrian's first few strategic moves, but stopped laughing as soon as he found himself in a tight spot. Suddenly, his face took on a grave expression with a hint of confusion. How did this boy manage to pin his queen? They played in silence for the rest of the game, which was indeed quick, although not in the older man's favor. He didn't shake his hand or congratulate him after Adrian won. The boy collected his money, satisfied at his opponent's humiliation, and walked away with a newfound conviction in his own capabilities. Adrian loved Colombia, and he especially loved Medellin. The kind people, the perfect weather, the gorgeous women, and the emergence of more and more upscale restaurants. It was hilarious how Americans were clamoring to move here. There was now a digital nomad visa for Colombia, but some Americans were actually getting rejected, which amused him to no end since it was usually Latin Americans who got rejected for American visas. Adrian knew many foreigners preferred Buenos Aires and Mexico City because they were more developed. Mexico City had better food, but it was also more expensive. Buenos Aires was more European and cheaper, but it was far. Colombia had the perfect balance. He had mixed feelings about the hordes of Westerners moving to Medellin. On the one hand, they were rude and complained too much. On the other hand, their presence boosted his property value, and he didn't mind the increase in cost of living because he could afford it. His rental properties were all aimed at American customers. One in El Poblado was rented out as soon as he made it available online, despite clear disclaimers that the building was still under construction and the pool and gym were unfinished. The apartment was fully booked for the next 3 months at $200 per night. He moved into a hotel, and even though it was luxurious, he missed the tranquility of his apartment. Every night, he'd hear the sounds of people fornicating through the walls. On his first night, he got into the elevator with an American man who looked to be in his 70s, with a beautiful Colombian woman who looked 18. The expression on the man's face was like a child who just got a new toy. The next morning at 10 a.m., Adrian got into the elevator with 3 middle-aged Americans, accompanied by another beautiful young Colombian woman. He wondered what kind of orgy was about to take place between them and hoped it wasn't on his floor because he was planning on taking a nap. Adrian understood the appeal Colombian women had to Western men. He loved them too, and preferred them above all others. It was possibly the main reason he didn't want to leave his country. Having a large mating pool of beautiful women was important to him, to every man. He informed me it was the underlying drive that propelled men to do anything, to make themselves more attractive to women, to have more access to women. It was simple biology. In Colombia, where his height was above the average and his net worth was in the top 1%, Adrian was on the winning team. There was little incentive to leave. He said the women here have well-defined posteriors as a result of walking up the hilly streets of Medellin. Once we were walking through El Poblado on a busy night, and he pointed out which women had fake butts and which were real. He also pointed out which ones were probably prostitutes. Once on a trip to New York City, he couldn't check into his hotel because his foreign credit card didn't work. To his disbelief, the receptionist stopped trying the terminal and threw the card back at him. Adrian was afraid he'd have to sleep on the street and actually began brainstorming where would be the safest options when a different receptionist came to help him and finally got his credit card to work. This disrespectful behavior would never happen in Colombia, he said. In Medellin, he's seen locals run after a thief, beat him up, and return the victim's things. A friend of his went to Paris and got robbed on the train, but no one bothered to help stop the thief as he ran off. Another friend was living in Houston, Texas, and a truck full of white men yelled vulgar comments as they passed her. Another friend worked as a counselor at a summer camp in Portland, Oregon, and a child asked if he was going to clean the bathrooms later. In his own building, an American guy needed help communicating with the security guard. Adrian stood there for 10 minutes to be their translator, and the American didn't even say thank you before walking away. Poor people from remote villages in Colombia behaved with more courtesy than rich people from first world countries. He had the urge to tell the next rude foreigner to go back where he came from. Adrian grew up in a poor neighborhood in a big city. People struggled every day, but they were happy. They never lost their warmth, and especially not their manners. He'd only been mugged once, back when he was a university student in Bogota. He was waiting for the bus when a man sidled up next to him. He told Adrian he had a gun and would shoot him if he ran. He asked for his wallet and his phone, which Adrian reluctantly gave him. During the handing over of items, the man said he was only robbing him so he could eat dinner that night. He said he noticed Adrian was wearing a backpack and guessed he was going to university, which meant he had a brighter future than he'd ever have. When the bus arrived, he asked if Adrian needed money for bus fare and gave him some bills from the wallet he'd just stolen off him. Years later, while enjoying a fancy meal in one of Medellin's upscale restaurants, Adrian sometimes wondered what the thief was doing now. Adrian loved the sleek, modern design of the new buildings in El Poblado. He despised traditional styles that foreigners thought were charming and quaint. To him, they symbolized backwards behaviors and an antiquated way of thinking. After spending some time with indigenous tribes near Santa Marta, he observed their women weren't allowed to wear shoes and had to walk behind the men, who were allowed to wear shoes. He wished these people would abandon their archaic ways and assimilate into modern culture, and be an active part of the country's economy and help themselves to a better life. Their main source of income was selling useless trinkets to tourists or just begging on the streets. The Spanish conquest wasn't pleasant, but it brought progress to Latin America, improving it for the better, Adrian said. He despised the influx of Venezuelans immigrating into Colombia, causing the spike in crime and straining local resources. He informed me that the rich Venezuelans go to the United States or Mexico. The poor ones come to Colombia, and they're up to no good. He said landlords didn't want to rent apartments to Venezuelans because they'd move in, refuse to pay rent, and refuse to move out. A friend of his owned a shop, and offered a Venezuelan man a job, only to have his shop robbed by the man a week later. Once, a Venezuelan man approached Adrian on the street, asking for help. The man said he had a new baby and needed diapers and formula. They were standing right outside a supermarket. Adrian's guard was up. But he knew what it was like to be poor, so he decided to help the man. They went inside the store, and he noticed the man chose the most expensive baby formula and diapers, claiming his infant had digestive issues and sensitive skin and needed these high-quality items. The only way Adrian would know this was a scam was after he paid. If the man asked for the receipt, then he could return the items after Adrian left and get the cash. The moment came, and once they were outside the store, the man did indeed ask for the receipt. Adrian asked why. His response was, the police might think he stole these items and he needed proof of purchase. This was a lame story, and Adrian proceeded to give a spiteful monologue on how Venezuelans came to Colombia to cause trouble, then play the victim and complain of discrimination. He left the man with the bags of expensive infant products, but no receipt. The total cost was around $100, which was a lot of money by Colombian standards. But Adrian was already rich, so he didn't care. He said he could tell the difference between Venezuelan beggars and Colombian beggars, not just by their accent. Apparently, Venezuelan beggars yelled curses at passers-by, while Colombian beggars were more dignified when no one gave them money. To interject, I reminded Adrian that the restaurant where we met was owned by a nice Venezuelan family. He nodded, yes, they were decent people, but one of the waiters took forever in serving his food. His anecdotes were a complete surprise to me. The Venezuelan people I met were all very kind to me, had regular jobs, and were doing the best they could just like everyone else. Adrian spoke about the economic downfall of Venezuela and Argentina with a hint of delight in his voice. At his first job, his Venezuelan and Argentinian colleagues were unbearably arrogant and treated him as an inferior because he was Colombian. But now, he didn't have to work at all, while his former colleagues talked about adding water to their shampoo and dish detergent to make them last longer and save money. He savored these stories with sweet satisfaction as he relaxed in his jacuzzi on the balcony, taking in the view of Medellin from his luxury high-rise. Unfortunately, his taxes were unbelievably high this year because the current president believed in raising taxes for the rich. Since Adrian used to be poor, he knew many poor people took advantage of social welfare systems instead of working. He's seen poor families have more children in efforts to get a bigger check from the government. A country needed to create jobs to help citizens help themselves instead of handing out monthly allowances. Successful entrepreneurs are accused of greed because they don't give their money away. That's the problem with being rich, smart, and successful, he said. People don't even ask for your money nicely anymore. They demand it like it's their right. Adrian only spent 1 week in San Francisco before going back to Colombia. Even though he despised socialism, he was grateful for his country's free universities. He received a quality education and worked with colleagues educated at Stanford and MIT at the same Silicon Valley tech company. But unlike them, he didn't have $1 of debt. The universities weren't really free, he added. The money had to come from somewhere. Like most people, he leaned left in his university years, but the downfall of Venezuela and Argentina under their liberal governments made him look into things more, and he changed his mind. He had plans to travel for a few months, maybe even a year or more. Money wasn't an issue anymore. His apartment rental was doing better than he expected. He had plans to buy another one in Bogota since the foreigners kept coming and real estate value kept rising. He wanted to visit France, Turkey, Eastern Europe, Japan, Korea, and maybe Singapore. He had no interest in India, Africa, and most of Southeast Asia because they were too undeveloped, polluted, and the climate was too hot and humid. He already grew up in a poor place and wasn't interested in other poor places in different time zones. Adrian was happy to be single, even though his friends and family found it odd. He was a decent-looking 32-year-old man of means and status. Why didn't he have a girlfriend? Adrian knew he had to be careful with women because he had money. When someone asked what he did for a living, he'd reply he was an independent worker. Once on a date, he took the woman back to his apartment, and she began asking how much his furniture cost. This put him on his guard, and he didn't ask the woman out again. At a language exchange, an older American man asked him if he had a girlfriend, and if so, how much did he pay her every month? Adrian didn't understand. The man clarified, every Colombian woman he ever dated asked to be paid a monthly allowance. Adrian was in shock and full of pity. Colombian women generally expected more traditional gender roles than in Western countries, but this was downright pathetic. Adrian said, these types of foreign men were just losers, in Colombia and in their home countries. At the same time, he knew there were many women who demanded a lot from men, but brought very little to the table. He thought wistfully of his first girlfriend, who was possibly the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. She lived in Medellin, and he lived in Bogota. They flew back and forth every month to see each other. He was always faithful. The distance made him appreciate her more and put more value in the time they spent together. She loved him before he became rich and successful, and once he was, asked him for emotional support and nothing more. There came a time when she wanted to switch careers and expressed an interest in software engineering, which was his field. He helped her study and calmed her down when she got frustrated. When she got her first job, quickly rose through the ranks and was making 5 times the salary of what she used to make, he was bursting with what he called paternal pride. When she bought her own apartment, he had to repeatedly insist on buying her some furniture. She refused multiple times, saying it wasn't right for him to spend so much money on her. He insisted a bit more until she finally gave in and accepted the expensive gifts. Adrian claimed, once he was certain a woman wasn't after his money, he'd become very generous. If they met in his 30s, he would have married her. Unfortunately, they met in his 20s. He didn't reveal the reason for their demise, only that it was long and complicated, but there was no infidelity involved. I thought to myself, Adrian said this woman was perfect, and yet, perfect wasn't enough. His second serious relationship was with a beautiful young Egyptian woman. It was long distance, but he loved her enough to try and fail at learning Arabic. He read the Quran and came to the conclusion that Islam was ridiculous. He asked her to abandon her religion and move to Colombia to be with him. She did not take him up on the offer. I paused for a moment on the gravity of his request. He asked her to leave her faith, her family, and her country for him. To my knowledge, Egypt was far more conservative than Colombia. If the relationship didn't work out, how easily could she return to her former life? For her sake, I was relieved she refused. I asked why he thought Islam was ridiculous. He said while studying the Quran, he came across the part stating, in a court of law, a woman's testimony is worth half of a man's. He also despised polygamy and observed that Sharia law clearly favored men, and most women have been successfully convinced that this was in their favor. It was the same with Christianity and just about every religion on planet Earth. Adrian was atheist and trusted in math, science, logic, and rationality. The idea of having 72 virgins in the afterlife did sound fun, but he didn't have to believe in God to fantasize about them. He recalled a time at a language exchange in Medellin when 2 Arab men asked where he was from. He replied he was a local, a Colombian. They laughed and asked if he was a drug dealer. Unperturbed, Adrian said no, he wasn't a drug dealer, and asked if they were terrorists. One of the Arabs became instantly offended, accusing him of being racist. The other Arab said, "No, wait, my brother, he's right. We should not make these assumptions about him." Adrian didn't care what either one of them thought, and looked for someone else to talk to. At another language exchange, he talked with 2 other Arab men who boasted Muslim superiority in math, science, and the arts. Adrian responded, So why are there far more Jewish Nobel Prize winners than Muslims? The two Arab men were deeply offended. Adrian loathed anyone who believed they were better because of race or religion, and never hesitated to put them in their place. His third relationship was with a woman he didn't take seriously as a partner, but he still requested exclusivity, and she agreed. She was a diplomat from Europe, and the only woman he ever dated who was of higher status than he was. She was gorgeous, dressed elegantly, and insatiable in bed. They went to black tie events, had bodyguards, and limousines. It was fun, he said. Since she was European, nothing in Colombia was ever good enough for her, except him. Their relationship was the only thing she never complained about. He recalled how upset she'd get when he had other plans for the weekend. They weren't even social plans. Sometimes he wanted to spend the weekend studying artificial intelligence. He didn't have to work anymore, but he still enjoyed keeping his skills up to date. Adrian was living in Bogota at the time. 6 months later, he was strongly considering a move to Medellin, so it was a good time to end things. He never thought of her as a potential life partner anyways. Their relationship served mostly a sexual function. She wept bitterly during the breakup conversation. To his disbelief, she said she'd quit her career to be with him after working so hard for many years to earn it. He told her no, she should never quit her job for any man, and said goodbye. He was surprised at how difficult it was to recover from the breakup when he was the one who wanted to end things. She gave him so much pleasure on a consistent basis that cutting it off so suddenly threw him into withdrawal. He missed the way she yelled at the top of her lungs during sex, so loud he thought he was hurting her, but she reassured him it was quite the opposite. Shortly after the breakup, he discovered she was seeing another man during the end of their relationship. He was in complete shock. Even though he never took her seriously, her infidelity was a painful betrayal. They both agreed to be exclusive, and she violated the agreement. He cried for weeks. On principle, Adrian had never been unfaithful to any woman. Several times he demanded an explanation, but she never gave him one. Whenever he went to Bogota, she always managed to accidentally run into him. They still went to the same gym. Even though there were plenty of vacant treadmills, she'd always choose the one that was right next to his. She knew his entire routine and made sure to be at his favorite bakery and his favorite lunch spot, exactly when he'd be there. He wondered if this was her way of telling him she wanted him back, even though she was with another man. Adrian was careful when it came to condoms and contraception. He had no interest in STDs or children. When he decided to be exclusive with a woman, they both took STD tests and showed them to each other. Afterwards, the lady in question would take some form of birth control so they could enjoy sex without a latex barrier. He said he didn't want children, but at the same time said anything was possible. Adrian almost fathered a child once, and with a woman who was not single. How flexible morals become under the right circumstances. She took the morning after pill, but after some research, he discovered that it wasn't effective if the woman was ovulating, which she was. He waited in suspense for the rest of the month and made up his mind to provide for the child. Luckily, her period came, and he was free. From that point on, he was vigilant about contraception. He still daydreamed about his diplomat ex-girlfriend despite her infidelity. It wasn't because he wanted her back. It was because nature wanted us to reproduce and programmed us to miss the last person we had sex with, he said. Back when he lived in Cali, there was one girl who had her oral technique so precise, he sometimes considered reaching out to her after all these years and rekindle their romance so she could do it to him again. Of course, he never actually did. He was a rational man, with self-respect and control. Look, no offense, he told me. The simple fact is, women drain men of money, time, and energy. If Adrian was going to play, he had rules. He liked feminine women with long hair, delicate features, hourglass figures but not too curvy, and skin that wasn't too dark. She had to be working towards something that raised her status or furthered her career. He wasn't interested in women who were older than him, who already had children, or who expected him to pay their living expenses so they didn't have to work. He was contemptuous of women who believed they were entitled to fancy dinners or lavish gifts without bringing much to his own life in return, aside from their body. He sighed and said he could afford to hire a team of the most beautiful escorts in Medellin to service him, all at the same time if he wanted to. But no. He only wanted one perfect woman to be everything to him, and he to her. There were 2 scenarios where he'd be willing to be the provider. If she studied full-time, working towards a degree, or if she took care of their children, the house, and him. How thorough he was, I thought. Adrian not only had rules, he had preconceived exceptions to those rules. He wanted his future partner to be completely honest and open about her sexual fantasies, feeling no shame in revealing her deepest desires. Once he dated a girl who was prude and proper, but unleashed her sexual appetite after drinking too much one evening. Afterwards, he kept encouraging her to drink whenever they went out, in hopes of releasing her inhibitions later on. Women were so uptight when it came to telling men what they wanted in bed, he sighed. He and his first girlfriend had a strategy when he performed oral sex. She'd squeeze his hand when she liked what he was doing, and let go when he was losing ground. This tactic worked extremely well. He didn't like women who'd been with too many men. It wasn't fair, he said, but it was biology. A sexually experienced woman also meant more comparisons. Adrian wanted to be the best lover she's ever had, and a woman with a high body count meant he had more competition, even if they were in the past. At the same time, virgins were also unappealing. A woman with too little experience meant she'd be curious about other men and would be likely to cheat, which was unforgivable. I asked him what this magic number of ideal sexual partners was. He couldn't, or wouldn't, give me an answer, saying everyone was different. He also added, based on what I had told him of my own sexual history, I've probably been with more people than he had. I actually don't know how many people I've slept with. I don't think it's something worth keeping score. But I've never been married, and I've been living independently in big cities since I was 17, so I'm certain I've reached the undesirable range for Adrian. I actually asked one of my male friends about this, and he confirmed it's true that men don't like to invest in women who've been with a lot of men, and yes, it was a matter of biology. However, if a man insists on knowing a woman's body count, he was not a good choice, and the woman should not take him seriously as a real partner and move on. I also asked one of my female friends if her husband ever asked about her body count when they were dating. She replied no. He only asked when was their last relationship, and made no further inquiries about other men ever again. Duly noted. Adrian valued exclusivity and asked me if I'd ever be in an open relationship. I said no. After years of whirlwind romances during my travels all over the world, I want a traditional, committed relationship when I finally do put down roots. I want to cherish someone and be cherished in return. Open relationships are not for me. He then asked, what did I offer a man? Well, I could only retell what previous partners told me, that I didn't try to change them, that they could be themselves, and that I filled their lives with tenderness and laughter. Unfortunately, I couldn't offer them magical powers. Adrian playfully responded that he liked telekinesis. I couldn't help but wonder if this rather direct question had a hidden intention. He made further inquiries into my career, my family, my hobbies, my Asian culture, even my diet. As time went on, his questions became increasingly intimate. Do I get jealous easily? Which country had the best lovers? Would I get an abortion if I accidentally got pregnant? Would I do a threesome? Do I swallow during oral sex? I already left Medellin for a few months now, yet he continued to message me every day. I grew used to his presence in my life. I loved telling him about the new people I met and my observations on the diversity of Latin American culture. I was reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. The story follows the adventures of two humans, an alien and a robot, through the universe on a stolen spaceship after the destruction of planet Earth. Adrian loved math and science, so I enjoyed telling him about the spaceship powered by an infinite probability, and all the gadgets that came with it. Sometimes we talk for 5 or 6 hours a day, exchanging messages and voice notes that ran 2 to 3 minutes long. After a month of this, I naturally began to have feelings for him, despite his opinions on certain topics, many of which I disagreed with. I still felt attracted to him. I decided to tell him so because I wanted to know where I stood. I was willing to continue investing several hours a day to get closer to someone who had feelings for me as well, but I wouldn't accept anything less. He seemed amused at first, and then asked me what exactly it was I liked about him. It took me a few hours to think about it. I responded, I felt happy when we talked. I could be myself with him, and we had a lot in common. He replied I was confused, and that these were the feelings you had for a close friend. So I got my answer. He only saw me as a friend. It seemed implausible, since talking for 5 or 6 hours a day was more time than most people spent with their spouses. He must be a very needy friend. I asked why he talked to me so much. He replied, I was intelligent, I had interesting stories, and that the rest of his friends worked regular 8-to-5 jobs and didn't have as much free time as I did. Well, it wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I got my answer and knew it was time for me to make some changes regarding how I spent my time. I flipped through my journal and read an entry from a few weeks ago, expressing concern about spending so much time talking to Adrian lately and neglecting my writing as a result. I told him to stop contacting me. He could find someone else to entertain him in his ample free time. He was surprised, saying I was taking what he said the wrong way and using it against him. If all he wanted was entertainment, he could simply watch a TV series. He appreciated and cared about me. This misunderstanding was due to our cultural differences, and he's like this with all of his friends. When he said this, I consulted my Latin American friends on this point about culture differences, and they confirmed, yes, Colombian culture is more flirtatious, so perhaps I did in fact misinterpret his intentions. But regardless of Adrian's justifications, I no longer wanted to invest my precious hours in him. I realized I wasn't even sure what he looked like anymore. I don't remember feeling physically attracted to him when we went out those few times back in Medellin. I just really enjoyed talking to him. It's possible I could have gotten myself worked up over nothing. It would have been a disaster if he returned my feelings and flew out to meet me wherever I was, only to have me change my mind as soon as I laid eyes on him. It happened once before in my university years. I met a man outside the movie theater. He seemed good-looking, so I gave him my number when he asked for it. I went home for the winter holidays, and we'd talk all night, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. for 2 weeks. I returned to New York City full of hope, only to be disappointed at the lack of physical attraction when I saw him again. Our conversations were just as energizing as before, but I could not muster any desire for more than friendship, no matter how hard I tried. These weeks of getting closer to Adrian could have ended in the exact same anticlimactic way. His rejection hurt, as all rejections do, but I knew I would be just fine. I picked up my pen and notebook and began writing. I relived the days after leaving Medellin, the tranquility of the coffee region, the clear blue waters of the Caribbean. visiting Ecuador and Peru for the first time. I felt a surging sense of pride in how far I've come. 2 weeks later, 3 notebooks were filled to the brim, and I still had more words inside my head, bursting to get onto the page. It felt wonderful to invest my time in myself again. I'd be going to Argentina soon, where this 14-month adventure through Latin America would continue, and there would be more stories waiting to fill the pages of my life. You never know who you'll meet when traveling in a foreign country. Get a glimpse of my social life in Medellin in this video, where I attend a Venezuelan dinner party and meet a fellow traveler with multiple sclerosis.